we're seeing a lot more focus from an adversarial approach against the critical infrastructure of another nation, whether it be sympathetic attacks because I live in country A and I don't like country B, or if it's direct nation state sponsored.
This is a Security Weekly production. Security Weekly is a resource of Cyber Risk Alliance.
The Cybersecurity Collaborative, in conjunction with Cyber Reason, is proud to present CISO Stories. Each week, CISO Stories takes a deep dive on security leadership. The Cybersecurity Collaborative is a unique membership community enabling cybersecurity leaders to work together in a trusted environment. To learn more, visit securityweekly.com/CSC.
I'm joined today by Wayman Cummings, who's a longtime friend and VP of Global Security Operations at Unisys. Wayman, it's good to have you here.
Great to be talking with you today, Sam.
Yeah, we've spoken over the years, and we do have an ability to talk at length about almost anything. But I think what I'll start with is the fact that there's an asymmetry in cyber that, even though people may have mature and strong organizations, collectively, we're not doing so well. That we are, in fact, failing at security, and no denigration of people working really hard to improve how they do security and their maturity level. But we seem to be stuck in what you called cyber kindergarten. Why do you think that is? Why are we failing at security collectively, and why are we stuck in cyber kindergarten?
I think part of that is, as an industry, we're always looking at what is the next great thing we can do. The threat landscape continuously changes. And so as vendors continue to evolve how they assist those of us in the practitioner side in addressing them, we kind of lose sight of where we started at. And I think, when I think about that, I think about the vulnerability management concept, which is not real sexy. We're kind of like, yeah, that's interesting, but it's not the really cool stuff. It's not the attack surface. And so we tend to not put the prioritization and the focus on those core functions that, and they kind of come back to bite us. We look at some of the things that have occurred over the past 18 months, are fundamental challenges that have come back, that have caused real world impact for each of us.
Are we measuring the right things then, do you think? Is this a case of, hey, we're tackling the doable things, or we're tackling the obvious checkboxes, but should we be measuring something different, or should we be approaching it in a whole different way?
From my perspective, I think we collectively as an industry need to start looking at it from the value of the risk. So when you look vulnerability management, you pull up this dashboard from whatever your favorite vendor is, and it's showing you all of these criticals, all of these highs, and it becomes almost insurmountable of how to address it. And so, looking at it more from a risk perspective, looking at areas where you can say, yeah, that's high vulnerability, but because we've segmented that region off, we can kind of prioritize it later. And I think it's going back fundamentally and looking at what is my biggest risk. As I'm standing here in my house, if the window I'm looking at is cracked and every other window is good, that window is my highest priority. I need to address it first. And I think we got to take that similar type of approach to how we're addressing these fundamental challenges.
Yeah, it's almost triage, but let's dial in a little closer and maybe talk about how this stagnation impacts security for critical infrastructure in particular. How does this carry through into critical infrastructure?
Well, I think in our critical infrastructure space, part of the challenge goes back even a little more organic into the funding model around it. There's always the mindset for a lot of critical infrastructure is it was unconnected. It wasn't going to be a target in the mindset of the people who were operating and running it. And now, and I wouldn't say in recent years because it's been more than that, we're seeing a lot more focus from an adversarial approach against the critical infrastructure of another nation, whether it be sympathetic attacks because I live in country A and I don't like country B, or if it's direct nation state sponsored. And so I think from a core perspective, it's got to be funded. They've got to have the potential to have the support financially, and then to have the resources to be able to, support those environments, because they are unique at times. They are old at times, and often it becomes that an IoT device has connected components of it so that it can be remotely managed.
The majority of critical infrastructure providers are in the private sector. Wayman, from your perspective, at what point does cybersecurity rise to the level of national security, and how do we address that fundamental issue, right? That the things that matter most to the nation are in fact run from the private sector.
And I think this is a great question, and an area that is a little bit more challenging. So as commercial companies are providing the support or helping run this critical infrastructure, they have a profit requirement, being publicly traded companies, and to continue to exist. I think this is an area where our government, when you look at some of the regulation that we deal with, whether in critical infrastructure space, in the defense industrial base, or just in general commercial, there's got to be a renewed focus on some of the minimum mandates that are required to operate. And what I mean by that is, we have a lot of, we have NIST standards, we have ISO standards, we have all these different standards that are out there. And I think it has to become a little bit more prescriptive, so that it's no longer a question of whether, this is the way this is written, I can probably pass this audit, but to be a little bit more prescriptive in nature of how it's applied, so that as a provider, I know I must meet this minimum standard. Before that, you look at CMMC and a lot of the teeth that are starting to grow out of that, I think that's got to expand. And I know that that's a little bit of an unpopular thought at times, but the reality is the risk is too high for us.
Yeah, standards are often tough. But this is that phrase, right? Quote, public-private partnerships, unquote. So maybe I could ask this question rather than just motherhood and apple pie, and because it's irrefutable that these things matter, and partnership always is a good word. What's the real value, the true value of public-private partnerships, in your opinion?
So what I've seen is very similar to you and I. I met you some years back. We've developed a relationship. Unisys has developed a very strong relationship with Cybereason and with a number of its members there. It creates the relationship so that when something does go wrong, you already know who you're going to be talking with. You've already vetted that person. You've already developed that relationship with the person as you're now going to go in and work, potentially a critical situation that's come up. So to me, that is the single most valuable aspect of any of these partnerships. And even people tend to dog InfraGard at times. It's like, well, it's just a surface level program. But what it does is it allows commercial operators to start to build these kind of relationships with FBI counterparts, with various members of, FBI groups. You have the National Defense Cyber Alliance, which is another area where you're building a core relationship that's going to be there should you have a major incident or a critical event that you're going to have to work with them, and you're sitting there having to run to your lawyers and go, can I talk to this person?
Yeah, it's what Ed Davis, who was the former police commissioner for Boston, and during the Boston Marathon bombing, what he called preparing when it's quiet, because when the crunch comes, it is personal. You call on the trust relationships you built when it wasn't crunch time. That, of course, brings me to probably my final question. How can we make working with some federal entities, in particular intel agencies, less intimidating to the private sector? There's this divide culturally around everything from how we classify information to who's inside the circle of trust and who isn't. How can we make working with federal intel less intimidating?
Well, and I think it starts with the previous is you're building relationships. So I actually did this to my legal staff. I reached out to one of our chief litigators and I said, I'm going to ask you a question. He's like, okay, Wayman, what? And I said, I'm going to have the FBI come stick a black box inside of our network. Tell me how you feel right now. And I did it obviously as a joke just to kind of mess with him. But his response was what we would all expect from our legal counsel.
No way.
Saying that we're going to, yeah. And then I said, look, this is obviously, I'm not going to do this, but I wanted you to start to understand why my ability to work with these people is critical. And I think once I got it broken down from the mindset of the big bad FBI or the big bad SEC or, DHS or any agency, and I said, look, this is where they can help us. And I think, they've seen too many movies where the FBI rolls up in all their trucks or any government agency rolls up with all their trucks. So they're all wearing the jackets and they're carrying, Pelican case after Pelican case of equipment walking in. And, that's not how it works. So one is go understand what their programs are. The Bureau, under their current leadership, is very focused on these public-private partnerships and working more closely with the commercial side of our industry. And obviously, I'm not speaking on behalf of the FBI. This is, public knowledge that I've collected. And I've seen the example of working directly with agents create that value proposition, but I had to do it organically. I had to start with our legal department to make sure they understood where those boundaries were. We weren't going to sit there and just give them all of our IP and go, hey, go watch for this for us. But we built a workable environment with the legal department in line with it. And now, there isn't that stigma of, if I say, you know what, I'm going to have a conversation with an agency. And it's really helped how we've been able to gain a greater level of intel from those agencies when we've needed information about a particular risk.
That makes total sense. Hey, thank you for being on. And I think we can collectively hope we get out of security kindergarten and at least get through elementary school relatively soon, but it's going to take quite a bit. Thanks again, Wayman.
All right. Thank you, Sam. Have a great day.
Cybereason is the champion for today's defenders, providing an endpoint security platform to prevent, detect, and respond to malicious operations on computers, mobile devices, servers, and the cloud. Cybereason. End cyber attacks from endpoints to the enterprise to everywhere. Learn more at cybereason.com/CISO stories.